Hi, guys, and welcome to Language of the Soul, where life is story. I'm Dominic Domingo, author, your host, and I'd like to welcome Virginia Grenier, our fabulous producer and co-host. Say hello to the folks.
Hello. And I didn't get a title. You usually give
I
me a
know,
title.
I dropped the ball. I told you I'm off my game today.
No, it's fine.
Oh, man.
We can call me the Pumpkin Queen because I'm going to be getting fall pumpkin-y with a fox on it nails from my Day of the Dead nails that I had from last time. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. What is it? The pumpkin lady?
Yeah, I can call me the Pumpkin Lady.
Okay, just don't order a pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks. That's where I draw the line.
I don't like those, to be honest.
I just don't. I kind of run the other way from anything trendy. So pumpkin spice has run its course in my book. Anyway, welcome. And we're very excited about today's guest, as usual. I mean, but it's always earnest. We're so lucky. We've had nothing but really inspiring guests.
Mm-hmm.
So this week is no exception. And Anya, if I butcher your bio, this is the standard disclaimer. If I butcher it, it's on you to correct me.
Okay.
I guess my first question is Anya Achtenberg. I've been saying Anya Achtenberg. Is that?
I'm afraid there's always a longer answer because this was a name that was imposed on part of my family in like the late 18th century by some emperor.
Right.
Because we didn't have last names, so they, people with money bought their names to reflect their occupations, and then there was, we didn't. So this is what they gave us. And
right.
I'm not German as much as it sounds German.
Right. Well, I did learn Achterberg with an R. Achterberg is more common, but in the United States, Achtenberg seems to be more common. But it's behind the hill, right? Or
I've had people say it's 8 villages, it's 8
right.
behind the hill. It's lots of luck, I think.
Well, that's what I noticed, like the difference between Achter and Achten, right? It could be the 8th hill, it could be behind the hill.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. I just want to pronounce it correctly. Yeah. So Achtenberg or Achtenberg?
It's all good. It's all good.
I want to hear you say it then, because
I would say Anya Achtenberg, and I would say Berg, but then people would think I'm pretentious.
Right. No, I have that problem because I speak French and I can't say the Champs-Élysées. It's like nails on a chalkboard to say Champs-Élysées. So if I say Champs-Élysées, suddenly you're pretentious. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
I would never do that to you. Okay, so Anya Achtenberg is an award-winning fiction writer and poet whose publications include Blue Earth, a novel, The Stories of Devil Girl, a novella, poetry collections The Stone Language, I Know What the Small Girl Knew, individual works in many literary magazines, including Harvard Review, Gargoyle Magazine, Tupelo Quarterly, Beltway Poetry Quarterly, and Poet Lore. Awards and distinctions include Southern Poetry Review, another Chicago magazine, Coppola's Zoetrope, All Story. I've actually applied. I think I've submitted to that quite a bit. New Letters, Raymond Carver Story Contest, Minnesota State Arts Board. Anya is completing a novel titled History Artist. I'm going to ask about that title. It's very intriguing. You have some great titles, by the way. Anyway, completing a novel titled History Artist with an ensemble of characters centered around a young Cambodian woman born at the moment the U.S. invasion begins. I think you're also finishing a collection, Land and Water Rise in Flame. Is that up and coming?
Yeah, it's getting very close.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to read my own little bio here. Her blog, Writing in Upheaval, explores her organic approach to writing craft that expands creativity, counters historical amnesia. I really will be, like I said, mining your brain about that alone. I love the way you worded that. Counters historical amnesia. Examines how trauma and narration connect and how history sits in us. Love the wording of that. You can't not write poetry. That's what I'm noticing. Everything you say is so layered. Do you know what I mean? It transports me, and it's intriguing to say the least. So I love the wording of countering historical amnesia, or the idea. And then I love how history sits in us. Anya consults individually, teaches 2 series of fiction / memoir / multi-genre creative writing courses. I think one of them is Writing for Social Change. Is that right? Redream a Just World.
Yeah.
We could spend our entire session talking about Redream a Just World. I want to ask, if I don't ask more about that, please prompt me. I think I know what it means, but I don't want to presume anything. I want to ask. Okay, and then finally, the Disobedient Writers Workshop, or the Disobedient Writer Workshop. Does that sound like you?
That sounds pretty much. I'll just say that the name of my my second book of poetry is The Stone of Language. So considering of is just a little preposition, you know, that was pretty good.
What did I say? Not the stone of language?
The stone language. Which
I'm so sorry.
That'll be my next book.
Right,
so
right.
I like
Well,
that.
just give me a quarter and you can have that.
Thank you. I'm searching.
Well, welcome.
Thank you a lot.
We're really glad to have you here, Anya. And, you know, obviously through social media, that's how, you know, you and I have connected, which is why I, you know, mentioned to Dominic, like, hey, here's like a really good guest to have on. And I mean, I knew some of your work, but I was blown away when I actually got everything from you to prepare for this. I was like, oh my gosh, wow, you're like really, you know, got this just breadth of, you know, expertise, which is just amazing. So with that in mind, you know, I would love for you to share with us because, you know, you do work with authors and you know, you are into poetry and creative writing and stuff. And I know you've emphasized the importance of helping individuals find language, for their unique experiences and cultures. I would love for you to kind of share with us, you know, particularly striking, you know, the transformative parts that you've witnessed in storytelling through that process.
I think one of the I'm a complicated person.
We've got all the time in the world.
with simple taste.
Right.
Except for cheese, because I was in France and
I'm
ruined.
Do you remember habité ou non habité when it comes to non habité?
No.
Inhabited or not inhabited?
Right.
By worms.
But no kidding.
Yeah, they're not legal here, but yeah, so many cheeses. Yeah.
So many cheeses. It's a little time.
Right.
Well, I think that there's an extraordinary sort of arc of in my own development of understanding what that liberation means in language and in story. And I usually say both in language and in story. And when I speak of language, I'm speaking in a sense of the poetic, but not only in poetry, as I think the sort of one of the things that, of course, is the most basic to poetry is association, is bringing together in a flash, in a way, things that seem not to be connected, so that we understand that they are connected, which I think is probably one of the most fundamental principles that could possibly lead, you know, in the future, obviously, to peace. It is that mining of connection. And then the issue then of liberating language into its dynamic sort of force means liberating it into its ability to find its connections in this sort of massive web of language, in this multi-dimensional kind of universe of language. Because when we find those connections, not only do we come forward with exquisite language, so everyone can pat us and say, this is beautiful, but we come forward with this stunning and striking realizations of how events are connected, places are connected, humans are connected, species are connected. So there's that liberation both of language and into a kind of a free field of language that has an enormous amount of work to do, and it's in these times which are strikingly painful.
Hard to get up in the morning some days.
And it's sort of it's still, there's still this place of language that I think has, and obviously it doesn't do the whole job. It's not.
Well, that's what I'm hearing a little bit. I just want to make sure I'm following. It's almost like the sum is greater than the whole of its parts, right? Language is figurative by nature. So if you have an absurd juxtaposition, it sounded like you were saying the connecting of dots intuitively on the part of both the writer and the patron, right? But it's also the absurd juxtapositions that can't be explained, the numinous, I call it, or the ineffable part of language.
Yeah. I mean,
it seems like you were saying that through language, by addressing that abstract territory, we can heal on a macro scale. Is that a little bit of what I heard?
I think it is in part because clearly part of what has happened to people is a pushing back of their authentic expression for many, 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 many reasons. There's also, and when I move into the thinking about story, it becomes, I think, even clearer and very, very potent because we have been so overlaid with ideas of story that are historically based, but come forward as absolute.
Right.
Every story is a hero's journey, therefore extracting that being away from its entire context. I mean, there's a wonderful old poem by Bertolt Brecht where it called something like A Worker Reads History. And it's a sort of litany of what about, with a night, the something happened, the city fell. Was there not even a cook? Was there not and sort of bringing forward the context of each historical event and dismissing this idea of, the great man and the hero's journey, which of course is a decontextualized. It's always a decontextualized story. So, and that the other thing about that is that those old stories, which are, we want to know about Abraham Lincoln and we want to know about, whoever it is, right? But those stories come with, they sort of merge with this idea of story is structured this way. It's five parts. I mean, Aristotle said so, even though Horace said, but he said so. And then it's this, I have to use this word because I think it's so appropriate, this sort of ejaculatory structure of story. It's like, it starts with exposition, it goes with it, and then it reaches its climax, and then everything falls.
So so format-wise, it can be non-linear. In other words, you don't have to follow the Western storytelling arc. In other words.
Well, yeah, and that, the question of linear as chronological, there's not a single person that passes a day living chronologically
without telescoping to the past or dreaming about the future.
It doesn't exist. So the linear to me is also an abstraction.
Overrated. Right. It's not truth. It's not the truth.
It's a march, and I think that it has a sort of military force.
Right.
This is a story. This is how it unfolds. Anything that doesn't fit with it, when so much of the power of story has to do with the story next to the story, with a digression from the main story, with the story behind it. Of course.
It sounds a little bit like, Impressionism is an impression of light and how it affects form, right? And how it results in a color. And your eye, like a camera, can't expose for the lights and the darks equally. You tend to crunch the darks or blow out the lights, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so it actually rings truer because it's an impression the way you experience it in life. Not the hyper realism that cameras are capable of capturing,
Yeah.
So I love what you said. There's so much there, though. I wonder if I could follow up on one little grain in there. Because I noticed the title, History Artist. And I was intrigued by, again, just the juxtaposition of those two words. It's already a mind fuck. I mean, is that all right for me to say? Because like you're saying, the linear Western storytelling structure, part of me wants to say, but we don't get to play loose and fast with history, right? That's so ingrained in us. And I think I just realized this morning reading over this that I guess I have opinions, but I've never formulated them. So let me make sure, firstly, that what I get is you're implying that history is in the eye of the beholder, right? And we've always heard it's told by the winners. But I also heard a little bit in there that we decontextualize by not being specific to maybe cultures that haven't yet had the opportunity to tell their stories, right? Or by individuals that are not, I guess, marginalized or unique, own voices, that sort of idea that now, I don't know, that we do try to fit them into templates like the hero's journey, and that robs them of their maybe authenticity. Is that what I heard?
Well, I want to deepen this idea of what history art is for me. But the hero's journey, I'm just pretty sick of it.
Same.
You've been hanging out at Starbucks and hearing everyone.
I mean, it's everywhere. It's this barrage, and it's at this barrage at a moment when globally so many people are making history. And so many people without stars on their, shoulders, and without, books about them, etc., are making history, and it's always been so. I mean, the idea that, for instance, the how many people in the United States understand that all through the Americas there were quote maroon colonies of escaped Africans. Some of them lasted, as in Brazil, some of them that one lasted for what was it, Palmares? It lasted like 70 or 71 years. And people do not know that because it doesn't, not only because it doesn't serve many people to know that, but because of the sort of obscuring and pushing back of history, which is not new to this moment. It's not like we had the full history and now we have these right-wing et ceteras who want to keep that back. We are just at a moment of a blossoming of histories and how they fit together, because it's not just this one's over here and that one's over there, but that utter interrelationship.
Embracing the full spectrum, right? You can't push it back through the prism and get white light again, but you can embrace the full spectrum of colors and thereby find our interconnectivity. But I want to be clear, because I think
about history artists.
I mean, let me see if, and I don't want to make it about me, but ironically, my neighbor this week just gave me, he's been hinting at it for a while, but he just handed me a bunch of hard copies of articles and different things his mother had collected about, I'm not going to remember the name right now. Anyway, history is never what you think it is, right? It's kind of this untold story that he wants me to write. And just today he said, oh, now I'm picturing it as a graphic novel where they travel and right the wrongs of colonial America. And so I thought, well, there is this trend, and I just want to see if you have seen this trend of, I guess, wish fulfillment or aspirational retellings of history. And it is wish fulfillment. And so it's a revisionist history of sorts, but through a modern lens of our capacity and our potential. Is there a point where something is too sacred? I remember 15 years ago, I thought, well, I do love when Mel Brooks makes Hitler look absurd, but you know what? I can't go see Inglourious Bastards for whatever reason, because it seems like appropriation to me. So is there a point at which history is too sacred to mess with, if that makes sense, or to retell?
Well, I just want to clarify what I feel the real work of what history artists is not so much a sort of, abstracted looking at history. I'm looking more, I think, at those it is, in a sense, many of us, in a sense, all of us, but clearly some more than others, at those upon whom history has pressurized everything for them. History has impacted them so profoundly. History has...
Are we talking like ancestral trauma, in other words?
Certainly that. And of course, ancestral trauma is not something that's ever left, in a sense, and so the for me, more the question is that power of, in some way, making a life from a life that is in many ways shattered. And this I think is is for me very, very essential. And also for many people, including myself, our own histories have been lost.
Our personal histories, or again, the ancestral?
They're utterly interwoven. And for many of us, we lose generations, and we have an overlay of what people say our history was, and it disagrees with many other people about what our history was. And so there is, for me, I thought I could never write story. I started, writing poetry because there was that, not because it was easy, but because I was, in many ways, suffocated and pushed back in silence. So,
well, yeah, I relate. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, so I feel like, of course, there's been decades of silencing and erasure, and so it is very satisfying to tell those untold stories, right? I wonder, because this podcast is largely about, yes, the catharsis of writing, and then the healing that's possible through the creative process, right? But it's also about telling a new story, because we have the agency and the power to do that. So I struggle with this, and this, I'm not implying anything. I just want to learn more, truly. For me, yes, I've done therapy many times in life, and yet I just can't stop engaging in the catharsis of writing. I know full well there's a reason actors are in therapy. When you inhabit a role for too long, right, and you replay the same warbly records, it becomes a neural circuit that's very, hardwired. So I know for a fact, if I indulge a counterproductive narrative for too long, that it's really hard to shed that afterwards, just like an actor, But yet, I will never stop writing. I just wonder at what point you feel you might be kind of reinforcing a narrative that's no longer serving you.
This is absolutely not what I'm talking about, if I can be that clear. It's absolutely not what I'm talking about. I've certainly worked with in many populations and for years, and I don't especially want to do that anymore, but I've worked with people who are in agony in various ways. You saw the list of the kinds of people, the kinds of experiences, and I'm not sorry for a bit of it, but there was also a difference within that of people who were getting stuff out and people who were working into the craft of writing in a whole other way. So my understanding of this is that it's not to go over, quote, old stories, even though some of those old stories are moving people and driving people. It goes more to understanding then how history sits in us, because we can go over the stories, and most people on the planet endure extraordinary things without the kind of assistance that some people get. So what people do with their lives, what people do to survive, what people do with their stories, what people, their paintings, their conversations, their relationships, how that history sits in them, and what they manage to do to create a life, to delve into the gift of life, the beauty of life, at the same time bringing forward truths that are not a recycling of trauma, but truths that are extraordinarily specific to their experience. And with that, also the work of crossing, that magic, as you mentioned, of juxtaposition, so that our stories, for me, our stories, our being is multiple. Our stories are complexly joined, and the spark between one story next to the other story next to the other story, and sort of finding the connectedness and the coherence in this fragmented world, in these fragmented telling of stories, for me, is part of the work and part of the way that I'm understanding the workings of history in individuals, in communities, and in, for instance, the current, the thing that is the most foremost, and which I won't go into. We know what it is. But so it's not a recycling. It is a creative act, and there is no telling, because this work that is, for instance, of a narrator that wanders, of a web of association that keeps connecting out and further, helps to throw light on story and certainly on history in a new way, a way that gets people working, whether they are in the center of those stories or whether they have looked at those stories as spectator. It is something to make live, not recycle, but live and examine and illuminate.
Right. I like that distinction.
I was going to say, Dominic, what this is kind of making me think of, and I actually just recently was having a conversation over tea with a couple of friends of mine who are in, the writing world. And we were kind of talking, obviously, crazily, about the hero's journey and just that very rote kind of, matrix of how to tell story. And one of the things that we kind of started talking about is, sometimes, because one of my fellow author friends is working on a new story, and she was kind of saying, hey, I know you always have like your main, protagonist and your main antagonist, but, I have like these really great supporting characters. And so just kind of listening to, I mean, this is, and we kind of like started thinking about, because thinking about life, which is, obviously what we're talking about is how, story is life, is that, you have like you're saying, you have like these main people that we always hear about in history or in fictional stories are like the main characters. Yet there's these supporting characters that people think are just there to help those main people. But sometimes who we think is the hero isn't always the hero, is kind of where our conversation went, where sometimes those supporting cast, so like, in history, like the supporting people who were around the historical icon that you hear this, that you hear about in the history books, those other people tend to have their own journey to where you realize maybe, and I always think about this kind of like when I think of people who get marginalized, because I think, oh, they're just kind of off to the side, and yeah, they kind of influence stuff, but maybe we forget sometimes how much they influence stuff, and so they actually are more of somebody we need to focus on and hear about, does that make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
If I could just say, because part of what I understand in my writing, the way that I approach it, is that I seem to in prose, in the novella, it was an I voice, and it's centered in one character, and that was my sort of transition in a way from poetry into shorter fiction, which then became the novel. For me, the novel is the world that I want to inhabit, because I always have a cast, an ensemble, and not because I've decided, but because they exist and they grow and they speak. And I just want to, I love this. It's a quote from an old Grace Paley story. I think it was called Conversations with My Father. And she's talking to him. He's in his hospital bed, and he's complaining about her writing, where's the beginning, middle, and end. And at some point she says, every character, real or imagined, deserves the open destiny of life. So that, and I think that, the whole question then of what we focus on, if we are writing the hero's journey, we're focusing on excuse me, the damn hero. And the idea that people are, that a story is only that here is the person in the center of the story. I mean, there are stories that work that way and they're magnificent. But I think I was ahead of my time. I'm very old now. But the question then of whose lives connect, how deeply, how impactfully, how surprisingly, and a lot of my work with in teaching is to get these things sparking for people, and doing that. I mean, it is sort of the act of crossing itself is a profound one. If we think about crossing and we think about refugees trying to cross, into another place, and we think about people whose gender is crossing constantly. We think about people who are, there's so many ways that we cross, and there's that sort of elemental idea of the crossroads where Robert Johnson, the great blues player, supposedly sold his soul to be that unbelievably brilliant blues artist that he was. But the thing of crossing, and one thing that strikes me about that, there's a Mexican performance artist named Guillermo Gomez Peña, and years ago he wrote a sort of manifesto about the border. And one of the things he wrote about the border is that as you approach it, it disappears. That at the border, it's a rich place of crossing, and so getting people to get to their borders and realize, and that membrane might be so thin that
the English patient had a really beautiful metaphor around the borders that divide us, and I just remember they connected under the surface of they were literally buried in the sands when they made their connection. But I love that metaphor. I'm more and more interested in the universal these days, even if it's just a template, right? Like the hero's journey, it is a template. But I like in memoir and narrative or creative nonfiction the idea that the more authentic you can be, in the telling of your story, the more personal you make it, the more universally it lands. You know what I mean? I think all of that can coexist, the universality of story structure, but also by being more specific and authentic with your details, the more personal you make it, the more universally it can land.
Well, it's good writing. It's good writing. And of course, many of us have been beaten up with the idea with the established idea of what's universal. So we're in a moment of incredible flux where no, it's not the man. No, it's not the white person. No, it's not the rich person. We're in flux, and
but that's what I'm saying, to embrace our interconnectivity, and embrace unique marginalized voices. We do have to acknowledge the universal or our shared humanity, if that makes sense.
Well, but here's the thing. For instance, Toni Morrison, one of the greatest U.S. writers ever, and Nobel Prize winner, all that, and someone whose books so many people relate to, said, "I'm writing about and for Black people." And she did. And so, in other words, where there has been disappearance and erasure, I think people get to do whatever they want. And the fact is, fine writing, deepened writing, does what, I mean, do I think Hemingway is the greatest writer in the world? No, I absolutely do not. Could I learn a couple of things from him? I guess so. But I have other teachers. And I mean, for instance, if a very ridiculously young writer who's one of the most extraordinary writers, and a poet and memoirist, and I think he may have gotten another book out, but Ocean Vuong.
Oh my God. It's on my coffee table now.
Yeah, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which in itself makes a person fall
got
down.
3 pages into it and I had to go write. I can't get through it because it makes me want to go write.
Yes, yes.
So haunting.
Yes. And so he doesn't need to think about the universal, because there is no such thing. except that, we're all going to live or die on this planet. That's pretty universal.
Well, existential terror is pretty universal. Comes with the deal. Yeah.
Yeah, and the destruction of the planet in many, 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 many ways. So, but there's a writer. It's a very specific experience.
Right. Well, I use Tori. It's a silly example, but Tori Amos. I don't know if you're a fan, but her lyrics are so obscure. You don't know what the hell she's talking about, and yet it resonates. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So I just think and truly believe and won't. How can I say? I don't have time, as many of us do not, to fight preordained notions of structure.
Right.
I've
hand holding, them. I call it.
Yeah, right. I've interrogated, those, you have to do this. If you think about, people shrieking, you must write from a sense of place, and you don't explore what that means in a real world where people are jumping hundreds on a boat that's going to sink. A sense of place where the very ground that people live on is being disappeared by climate catastrophe, and there's just, and by even those folks with generations of intergenerational trauma, that means that they're always looking to flee. That even if they live in the same house. And if you look at trauma itself, trauma, one thing that trauma does, if it, and it's real life, say it's, we don't even have to look in that sense at intergenerational trauma, which I think is has constant and profound effects. But trauma, it dislodges people from place and time. So how then does one write from a sense of place as a fixed thing when it's a different thing,
right?
And the fact of place and how one relates to place and the loss of place and the placelessness and the multiplicity of place, because so many people have fled from place to place to place to place to place, or been kidnapped from their own continent and moved from place to place to place to place to place. The impact of that, it's just place is a privilege in the sense that it's been, we've been beaten over the head with this right from a sense of place, right from and obviously whatever we're writing needs the richness, whether it's spare or whether it's lush, the richness of detail to help put the reader there, whether it's external detail, whether it's inner experiencing of something. So not arguing with that, but this idea of place is something that we can all get to in the same way is completely untrue. And the power of it, of understanding and working with the delicacy, the precariousness, the differences in the relationship to place, means also the differences in narration. It may be, for instance, one reason that, let alone culturally, like, for instance, you have the really exquisite writer, African-American John Edgar Wideman. And I always remember a story of his. It's in a little book called All Stories Are True. How's that one? And then it's the title story. And one of the things that in that story, he's right near his mother's house. He's going to talk to his mother, who is now ill with cancer and limited time, right? So he should be there in a couple of minutes, right? In a minute. However, it takes some pages because he's walking towards this conversation that is going to be really painful, because he's returned to this town that is he doesn't live in, with this sort of litany of streets that he's remembering of events, of people, of places, and it somehow for me merges to a kind of a jazz, that powerful cultural stream of jazz which wanders and returns. And so it takes some pages and he's all over the map, and it's like, except what do you get by this wandering? You get a profoundly deeper understanding
Mhm.
of him, his family, his story. And then he arrives, he comes back,
Mm.
there's the mother, he arrives. So
Mhm.
it's this sort of, there are
So
so many
the
reasons.
pacing is lyrical, right? It's not a construct that you try to conform to.
Yes.
It also sounds like a little bit like your voice is only fully fleshed out when you embrace the trauma and the PTSD, right? And all those things that determine your sense of place and your pacing and all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Though
Well, you
people do it
mentioned
in different ways, in very different ways.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You mentioned the jazz. I'm going to take that opportunity to follow up on. I noted I highlighted every time you said music.
Mm.
So yeah, in your form. And so I was
Uh-huh.
really intrigued by that. And if you don't mind, I want to just read a couple phrases.
Uh-huh.
I had to write breathlessly through fear into a discovery of my language and my music in the language. Above that, it says, and brought them into discovering the language slash music and forms of their own ways of experiencing the world. There was a third one. Yeah. So can you speak to that a little bit? What you mean by, I mean, I think I know, but I want to hear you say it.
Yeah,
The music in one's voice
yeah,
as a writer.
yeah. Well, a couple of things. One is that, in like the 50s or something, people like Denise Levertov and Charles Olson were talking about organic form in poetry. And this was
Mm,
like, wow, it's a big deal, right? And that had to do with not only the subject of the poem, but the writer, and had to do with the breath of the writer at that particular moment, in a sense. Now, I don't know if anyone talks about organic form in prose,
exactly.
but it's certainly, the question of not being formless, because I've had people go, well, if I'm not being choked by the 5-part story and the hero's journey, well, what am I doing? I'm just writing.
Right.
And
Well,
they want.
isn't there lip service given to rhythm and alliteration? And, I think there's a little talk of that in prose, isn't there?
Yeah, but I guess someone
But
will say, oh, the prose is musical, but this is I'm wanting a deeper and deeper and truer and more specific um, chorus, because there are infinite musics, even within us, in terms of, I don't want this book to sound the same as that book. And I don't have to consciously do it, because I am one of those people that have that very thin membrane. So beings come, and I don't, and of course, even that's been pathologized if a writer is a little, too unusual in
See,
their
I've been accused of
behavior.
head hopping. I get accused of head hopping, and I'm like, well, but we know more than we know we know. Like, welcome to my
Yes,
world.
yes,
And that's
yes.
actually the whole point of my voice, is to enlighten people. I guess it sounds condescending, but to the fact that we do know more than we know we know.
Yes.
And so you can call it head hopping all you want. I call it, omniscient or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's so rigid, isn't it?
Yeah, and that thing of that is part of the point of this sort of extraordinary opening of the associational web, which is, in a sense, the essence of creativity, right? Is finding something that you didn't think had anything to do with it, and like, wow. But that opening leads us. For me, one of the most both spiritual and political aspects of this sort of associational work with writing and with language is that it helps one arrive at the hidden. It helps one arrive at the invisible. And people can talk about that in a political way, and people can talk about that in a spiritual way. And it is clearly related. But it's that journeying through language, as if language were indeed a road. And it ain't I-94,
That's
so,
great.
it's like, and I do, and I think that also that question then of crossing, of getting up to, if one gets up to a wall, up to a border, this is not about, this is knocking them down. This is, cutting an enormous hole through it so that one can see, one can feel, and that sort of lessening, that thinning of membrane that is around us that keeps us. I mean, I got ego. We got ego. I'm a writer. I got ego. But in the writing, I don't. Because in the
exactly,
writing,
right.
the membrane is so thin that beings cross, voices cross. And I totally agree with you. We do not know what we contain. And part of the joy and the work of working with writers is that they're so sure they have this limitation or that limitation, or they've been yelled at, or they've been shamed. And it's to push against all of that into that liberating.
Well, let me see. I mean, I have my worldview and you've got yours, but I sometimes hear a little grain of something I want to pursue. And I guess, the idea of archetypes and the reservoir of the collective unconscious, I do think to a degree, the membrane you're referring to, we have access, right, to a lot of experiences by virtue of being human. But is there appropriation? When do you feel, what's the line between appropriation when you start, I guess, exploring, like Virginia was hinting at, your secondary characters might, for no other reason other than diversity and inclusion or representation, right, be from some experience other than your own. Where do you draw the line with appropriation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, this is a massive discussion, and part of what is difficult. For instance, I speak from my experience that I am a person that comes from refugees. I'm a person that does not know where everyone has been. I have a few details. I know there was someone who was Spanish and kicked out, in
the Spanish Civil War,
No, we're talking hundreds of years ago, the expulsion. But I know that there was, I know from various evidence, there was likely mixing of another part of the family which is happened. The Jews that came up out of Palestine straight north, and were in sort of the East in what became Russia and such places, were often mixed with Siberian nomadic peoples. So I know these things. The Sephardic side, those folks went all across North Africa and then up into the Iberian Peninsula before actually the Christians and of course the Muslims. And the sort of being kicked out, 1492, Inquisition, expulsion, and all of that. And so, do I know what I am? I have been told, accused, asked, stared at, like, and now I'm just an older person, so it things, I don't know if things show as much, but people did not know what I was. And the United States is organized much more around skin color for clear reasons of this is the site of these horrors of slavery, where skin color meant everything in terms of who can be seen and not seen. So I understand myself, for instance, as the only way I can call it is I'm a person of the mix. I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. I'm a person of the mix, as are many, many people.
Is nomadic a good word? Do you feel nomadic?
Well, nomadic would refer more to a group of people who are nomadic within a certain area, as in I believe the Hmong.
Right. But do you ever feel at home, I guess, is the question.
Not so much. And I've been around the block.
But that speaks to what you said earlier, like your whole life is affected by trauma and just being in your own skin or feeling like you have a home to begin with. It's fascinating. Yeah.
And someone, a wonderful, brilliant poet named Fred Marchand read some earlier stories of mine and liked them. Thank you, Fred. And he said one of the reasons he liked them was because, let's see how he said it. He said, within these are an imaginative embrace that does not appropriate. And that was,
wow, that's a really tricky thing to accomplish, isn't it?
I think it is and it isn't. And I think so, if that makes sense, to go back to that idea of of wandering, of crossing border after border, of being displaced, of being dislodged. What does it mean to be dislodged from body, from place, from culture, from a kind of a linear history in one place? That is painful. But for me, in other words, that is part of what I understand as history artists is that this pain, and it is painful. People like to think, oh, you just like to travel. It's like between, I can't afford a place to live in the U.S. and everything else. But I think that is how history artists is also that we become embodiments in some ways, and not in a simplistic way, but we become embodiments of some of the deepest aspects of our histories, sometimes in opposition to what our histories would tell us to do.
And it's not always just ancestral trauma. I just call it historical baggage. We're working out our parents' unresolved issues, right, all day, every day. And I call it in one of my stories, just called it the patchwork quilt of the subconscious. It's all of that. And in my teaching, I taught at Art Center College of Design. I founded their entertainment track. So I taught there for 20 years. And I have more and more international students. I put that in quotes, by the way, but, a variety of cultural backgrounds. And it was fascinating to me and I distinguish between style and voice a little bit. I would love to hear if you have any distinctions between style and voice. But it was fascinating. Like I could look at the crit rail and say, okay, this person's had a broken heart. This one, not yet. But their work will explode the minute, they've got nothing to lose. And then, but always, you saw this indefinable thumbprint that inevitably included their cultural background. And even if they strove for a given style for a given project, they couldn't erase the ancestral trauma and just even little motifs that they didn't even realize they were doing. They might even be trying to emulate a more Western style, but yet you see it all right there on the crate rail. It was fascinating to me. I don't know if that made any sense, but do you distinguish between voice and style?
I go to another place with it because I've read a lot, and I've read a lot from many different cultures, and I don't, the question of voice for me is multiple. Voice for me changes.
Right, of course.
So I don't, I know that there are certain things about my voice that maybe some people recognize, but not, I sort of defy them to say what it is.
Right. Well, it evolves. One hopes it evolves with
and the question
journey.
Of a style is a kind of for hair. For me, it's not a writing, it's not a craft element.
Right. Oh, really? You don't acknowledge it as a tool at all?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not unacknowledging.
Well, genre writing would require, right? Maybe literary fiction doesn't really.
I don't. Yeah, no. I mean, that's the thing. I've worked with genre writers, and I'm happy to, because, for instance, I can do a lot of work with people around a deeper development of the characters. So sometimes genre writers feel like so, in a way, pushed because they think they have to follow certain conventions, and so they may say, well, I just want my characters to be better. Well, that takes work, and that takes work that I love. Right. So sometimes they come to me and we do that, and I have a great deal of fun, as hopefully they do, in terms of really bringing forward these characters and deepening them. And but I don't, the idea of literary writing or literary fiction as some refined, like, and the real writing being genre writing is just not true. And
is there a distinction between literary and, I don't know, commercial fiction?
Yes, there is.
Is it the intent?
I think it varies with every literary writer. In other words, there is a deeper use and encounter with language itself. There is an understanding of finding.
Well, I'm going to assert, I think it's the intent. I think it's entirely different.
Well, I was going to say
and
that
the authenticity factor,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah,
Go on,
but-
Virginia.
Well, I was going to say, when you're talking about, stylistic writing, what kind of goes through my mind is probably because of the fashion background in me. But I know when I sit there and talk to people and that conversation comes up, I always see that people who tend to write in a style, it's usually whatever is the current trend. So like when vampire stories were huge and stuff like that, so it does, it becomes a very rote, stylistic, trendy way of pushing a story out.
Yeah.
Well, the elitist in me, and again, I went to art center, and it was pounded into my head, and I am what I am. But if you expand the scope and away from writing, and just talk about the creative process in general, me, Virginia, I'm going to say that inspiration comes from the universe itself, and it is demanded by collective consciousness because it knows what it needs in our proliferation. So I think genre writing often is uninspired and done for, commendable reasons like a love of craft or simply having a childhood love of, I don't know, Through the Rabbit Hole tales. And I just want to be a part of that tradition. And that's admirable, but it is distinctly different. I call that content. Whereas something with literary value and artistic integrity was inspired. And that's the difference to me when I say maybe literary fiction, the intent is different. It's inspired. Whereas sometimes somebody writes for a given readership, and of course it's not going to be authentic. If you're observing all of these constructs and maybe not telling the good, the bad, and the ugly, or the truth, because you're more concerned with your readership. I mean, that's a universal. When you concern yourself with outcome in the creative process, the very literary value and artistic integrity will suffer. All right, I've said my piece.
And I think also that the reason that I sort of went intent, because there are lots of people with literary intent who have to do more work to fulfill that literary intent. I mean, I do.
That they hit a wall in their ability to access their.
That's the question, and it's the question for all of us. There's not a literary writer, I think, who just has a constantly easy time. So I think it's because every literary work of quality. I actually was very blessed a very long time ago, so before a number of books, but I was in Michael Ondaatje's class a long time ago when I was still thinking that I'm only a poet, and I was writing fiction in his class, and I thank him, up there in Canada somewhere. But I think that then one can have the intention. So part of the work is to help people fulfill that intention, and also to discover it, to discover what it is even more deeply than, because it's never the same when you finish the book as when you start.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Would you say that it's like a narrative truth that basically shapes the reality of the story?
How do you mean?
So like when you're telling a story, like you're leading the narrative instead of writing, like I know, because I focused for a long time on within the children's and adult market, they always were like, oh, you're always, have like this specific theme that you're working toward. But I feel like a lot of times when you're writing more in a literary fiction standpoint, the narrative develops its own truth,
takes on a life of its own.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's life of its own. So it shapes this, our own reality of why we're in that story, of what into a deeper meaning.
I totally agree. When one of the things that used to drive me crazy, and I think it drove a lot of people crazy in school, as a young person in school, when they said, okay, well, but this doesn't have anything to do with that. This part, cut it.
It's tangential, right?
You don't know why exactly it's there because you're young. You just wrote this thing.
Right.
You only had 2 days to write.
Right.
But that work of discovering why that popped up, it doesn't mean absolutely.
Well, you don't even need to analyze it, do you? I mean,
well,
sorry.
You need to go back. I mean, you can write and write. Like, I think that writing is when you don't think. And I think that then, I mean, what's a wonderful old dead writer, John Gardner, who wrote Grendel, but he also wrote wonderful books on the art of fiction and on becoming a novelist. And he says, and I took it to heart. I didn't count though, because he said you should read your own work over 100 times, because what is true is that your work will teach you what you're doing.
Right. I guess that's what I was hinting at. Like, I know in the first gut level iteration, that's 100% intuitive. It's just a gut level expression of the inspiration, right? I do find, don't know why that's there, but I'm going to trust it. And sometimes I had a butterfly land once, and I'm like, I know that's not the cliche transformation archetype, but I knew it. I just needed to bring it back around. And so without examining it, like, consciously choosing not to examine it, I just knew, I should probably introduce it earlier so that it has resonance and then follow through. And it became the strongest metaphor in the piece and not what I expected. But after the 100th read, I figured out what it meant. But that's what I mean. I just feel like sometimes if it feels right and it's a hunch, your intuition knows better. So sometimes don't analyze it and let it unfold.
And that's the thing about language that I think is so important. It is the most collective thing that human beings have.
Virginia agrees with that. I know that.
I do. Yeah. Well, Dominic and I have had that conversation, many times. Obviously, not in the podcast.
It's the name of the it's the name of the podcast.
Which is the name of the podcast, which is what brought us here, because I was taking a it was philosophical psychology is what it was course, and we were talking about how what binds us as a society, no matter what your cultural background is language. That language is what brought people together, is the oral storytelling and the creative process of a group of people that were together, be it an actual city civilization or in a nomadic kind of
it's almost like it cements the universal. We all have our subjective reality, but it cements the universal truth on some level.
Exactly.
Can I jump in though? I know you have more to say, but it's triggering, and this might seem like a tangent, but that's what we're here for, right? You said nonlinear earlier. I just find it fascinating because I am a dude. I'm very linear, I'm socialized, linear and logical and rational and all these. Trust me, my pendulum swings, but I think I was socialized to be very linear. And so I come from a long line of men of their words or women of their words, being impeccable with your word, as the 4 agreements would say. And I call it integrity. I feel very fortunate, on both sides of my family. And so I always said, that's all we've got is our contract, our codes. In relationships, I would say, but, I dated somebody who said, well, words are cheap. It's actions that matter. And I said, well, I didn't say this. This is all in my mind, of course. And I was like, well, who have you been hanging around, and how sad that you don't trust, And so completely different worldview. It's actions that matter. Words are cheap, or words are all we've got. And I'm in between, but I do feel like there's got to be some value to words. Is that related at all? In that words do represent some kind of universal meeting ground,
I think, how can I say? I think that's been used to beat people with.
Which one? Words are cheap?
The universal.
Oh, I see.
And clearly there is at some level, we came from the stars or however it is, but it has been. And see, I
love language. It's a gift.
but I do think, and the vastness, for instance, of just English, I mean, is extraordinary. I mean, if you look at Derek Walcott and Kamau Brathwaite, and you look at all kinds of people who have layered in other languages and other silence languages and other attacked and forbidden languages of all kinds. So the diversity of language.
If I can, let me see
incredible.
do you feel more nuance is available to English speakers or no?
Than whom?
Other languages.
No.
Okay.
I mean, it's the one I speak Spanish, but I write in English, but no, I mean, every language is astonishing.
Why did you mention English just now? I might have misheard
well, because
something.
we're using it. So, but in other words, English is not one language.
Right. Well, that's what I'm hinting at, because I've heard there was a meme that said, we don't just borrow from our other languages, we follow them down a dark alley and beat them over the head and ransack their pockets. So I, at one point, just thought, I feel very lucky that we have borrowed from so many languages, and I feel that there's a lot of nuance available. I took French for 3 years privately with my friend Marie-Martine Bessot, and at one point, I mean, it's true, the English dictionary is 3 times the thickness of the French. But what that means is, in French, you have to be more inventive with your idiomatic reflexive verbs, for example. What that creates is more poetry, actually. So the language is designed to rhyme, and there's a beautiful resonance in that. And you've got all these idiomatic reflexive verbs, because you got to recycle and reuse their limited words. But point is, I just had a hunch that, there is some more nuance available. And granted, my French was limited, but I felt like a caveman sometimes. After 11 years of living here, she then went home to Paris. And not only did she have to explain, not everybody's a Trumper, she had to explain like a lot about her experience here. But she said she found it frustrating because she couldn't express herself the way she got comfortable expressing herself in English. I found that fascinating.
Well, I want to, sorry, I just want to jump in there. I want to say something too. When you speak about English, I guess we should be very clear that you mean
American English?
Well, yeah, American English, because I mean, if you think about like those in Britain, their word usage is not as vast as ours here in the United States. But with that said, too, I think what people forget who aren't from the American culture, and this is just gonna be my rant on this. Sorry, I just wanted to speak to this, is because we are supposed to be, and I know not always is this the case, but we're supposed to be the melting pot of the world. It's not that we're stealing language from other people, it's because we're embracing that language.
Right. That was a facetious, that was a reference to a very funny meme. The very funny meme.
But that's what I just wanted to speak to that.
Well, would that we did embrace it. But I in terms of the French, I just want to bring up a writer that I revere, because it's really quite interesting, right? So there's Henri Breton, who the father of surrealism, right? And he comes across Aimé Césaire from Martinique in Paris. I forget the year, like the 30s or something like that. And he writes, and he's writing, and Breton is like, oh mon Dieu, it's so because it's pretty amazing. And then he's going back to his poor, colonized, screwed over island, right? And after being in the mother country, which made people in the French Caribbean, and I'm sure in Africa too, take their exams at the same moment that they took them in France, which meant sometimes those folks were taking it in, at some ridiculous, like 3 a.m.
3 a.m, right.
So, but so there's Aimé Césaire, and he's on his way back, and he writes Notebook on a Return to My Native Land. And it is unbelievably, brutally magnificent. I mean, it's sort of like, let's see, I want to rediscover the secret of great speech and of great burning. I want to say tree, I want to say leaf, I want to roll words like maddened horses, like curfew, like, the man who couldn't understand me couldn't understand the roaring of a tiger. And it is just an extraordinary book. And Breton, I read and then I put away because there was a dryness, it's a sort
Yeah,
of,
well,
certain kind of cerebral lovely, and I'm pretty cerebral, but in other words, so there are so many ways that the languages that we intersect with what's considered our language.
I think
don't
it's the experience, it's inextricable, meaning I read Le Petit Prince, right, with my limited French, but it's about my speed, Le Petit Prince. And even that, it's kind of like the idea that, well, apparently in Inuit, there's a million words for snow because obviously it's different types of snow and they're surrounded by it all day, every day. So it might take 12 words to get across a concept in one language because it's culturally relative. And it takes, if I said 12, I meant 12. If I didn't say 12, I meant 12. And then it takes one word in another language. So I know, with the amount of French that I've mastered, the Little Prince does not land quite the same way in English because apprivoiser, there's a whole chapter with the fox about this taming idea. Well, unless you're raised in a culture where, like here in America, we just go, "Hi, how you doing at a party? How what do you do for a living? How much do you make?" Right? And so there's no reserve, so there's no taming to be had, and so it just lands so differently. And I don't know if you guys have read The Alchemist.
No, actually,
by Paul Coelho. Well, it's been translated into more languages than the Bible, and it's a great book. However, I think they had a horrible translator because, like you're saying, you can read early modern English, you can read Shakespeare, and it lands. The language is an inextricable part of the experience. With The Alchemist, I'm like, no, bad translator. It just didn't work in English. So anyway, I do think it's not just culturally relative, but the language is part of the experience. Again, in French, j'avais mangé, j'avais marché, I had walked, I had eaten. The past imperfect is designed to rhyme. It's so lyrical. Anyway, that's my feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I'm interested very much in the vastly different musics of language. And and I know people who can rhyme like beyond belief, and it's not me, but my rhymes are of a different, they're off. They're off rhymes more. And the music of the language, I think it also depends not only on rhyming, but on the fuel, the varying pace of it, the fuel, the sort of drive toward or explosion out of. It's the music
and connotations and denotations. There's so many layers, right? Humor is a tough one because of connotation alone.
Yeah, but it's an endless field, and I think, I've how can I say, there's a lot of, I think I learned various things and I never learned them in terms of how I am supposed to write. I think I always, from young,
lucky you.
I was not from this. First of all, I don't think there is one American culture. I think for me, in a sense, part of the deepest aspects of American culture are actually from the Black diaspora, from the African diaspora. That to me is profoundly important, as well as all of the the original cultures. And so I've always been an outsider in that sense, which actually has placed me, I think, closer to the very extraordinarily diverse heart of this country and of the Americas, which is a really complicated place. But I'm, I was always if someone told me to do it, I wouldn't. And
rebel without a cause.
Well, but I had one, and I had this nagging, aching, that this would kill me. Anything that I felt would kill me, and there were many things, and that would have killed me. And I tried earlier. I was, let me try to write this way because this is right, and it was a misery. It was a misery. It was an exclusion of the depth, the truth, the beauty. It was an exclusion. So now, when I was younger, I remember doing poetry readings, and every once in a while, someone would come up, and they liked it, but they look at me and they go, "That was it was so intense." And many
Intense.
years later, as the beginning of the 100 Years of Solitude starts that way, many years later, when Colonel Aureliano Buendia, when his father took him to discover, long story, but it oh God, where did it go? But I think I absolutely couldn't follow it. It wasn't even just a rebellion. It was an absolute inability. And what I want to mention is a really extraordinary book written by two French guys. Imagine that, two French sociologists, which are probably sitting in every cafe. There's always French sociologists. But Deleuze and Guattari wrote a book, it's a little book called Kafka Toward a Minor Literature. And for me, this was really important because it articulated things that I knew and felt. Part of it was the question of displacement and what they call deterritorialization, because they said that the larger the sort of amount or quotient of deterritorialization in language, the larger its radical or revolutionary potential.
Wow. Love that.
So I went, hell yeah. And the other thing they said that applied so much to what I understood of myself and of many other people coming from different experiences and cultures, trying to be writers in the midst of America, is that they talked about Kafka as writing in a cramped, subterranean way with a kind of intensity that did not happen in various things. Why? Because if you are displaced, they talk about him as, he was a German, German Jew in Czechoslovakia and in another place, another culture, another language, and all of that. So there's that being pushed. You're not the mainstream. You're being pushed.
Is subversive a good word for that? The cramped things is sticking with me.
I think it is, but I think it's not the originating idea. Is not I'm going to be subversive.
Right. It's a byproduct.
This is
almost
the only space that I have. Within it, I will do what I do. So I've always, to read that years after I suffered through trying to do this and that was extraordinary for me.
I wanted to go back to something you said a minute ago, partially for humor, but also as a transition. I wasn't sure what you were making with the reaction. Oh my God, that was ... intense. Is that a good review in your book?
Well, yeah, but in other words, people didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
Because
well, I guess that's my point is, I'm a Scorpio and I'm Italian, and you can probably tell I don't have an editing mechanism. So I often hear, passionate is my euphemism for temperamental. All right, passionate. But I think intense, I've heard that my entire life. And I've always thought, well, what's the alternative? Boring? What's the alternative?
Yeah. Well,
so intense doesn't mean a lot to me, but I guess I wanted to say too, I'm 55, I'm over half a century, and I identify as somebody. I've told this story, let's put it that way, because that's what this podcast is about, the stories we tell ourselves. So my entire adult life, I've said, well, I never bought the Matrix. I've always seen through social conditioning. I guess I pride myself on it, but I more identify as a gay man. I just never bought it hook, line, and sinker. None of it. the status quo, social conditioning. But now at 55, literally last week, I thought, well, why would I be the only one on the planet impervious to social conditioning? That's not logical. Right. So I'm more in the place of when and where Of course I was silenced and erased as a gay kid, right? With a blue collar Italian father. I'm aware of that. And I've spoken my truth for many decades now. But I just thought, there's always more work to be done. As much as you identify and you tell that story, maybe not. Like, look into the areas where, yes, you have sold out or unconsciously, like the crab in the boiling water, bought some form of social conditioning.
Yeah. And I think that question of, I think that's part of the work of the writer is to find ways to liberate. And it's not even, I think it's not even, some people are clearly sellouts, right? It's like, let me make a bunch of bombs because it'll make me rich, so they're sellout on every level.
I put food on the table and roofs overhead. Yeah.
But I think most of us have areas in our being that have not spoken yet. Yep. And the word, that's the thing of
you don't arrive, you never fully arrive, right?
Yeah, but we keep finding them, and that's the thing of the sort of surprise of turning the corner, the thing of crossing, the thing of allowing one bit of language to connect to another, to another, to another in these expansive maps, these expansive webs, and I think that in that, I mean, I've worked with so many people who were writing okay, and then with a process are absolutely shocked at what they are able to do. Absolutely shocked.
That makes me think
it's in them. It's in them.
Well, I did want to ask you this, and that's actually the perfect transition. When you, I don't know, liberate yourself, or one way of putting it is tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that's the true empowerment or the explosion of your writing, is when you can, without fear of, hurting people or any concern for outcome, as I said, how it's going to land with any kind of readership. Once you step into those shoes, do you remember Harriet the Spy? I guess we had to read that, and I read that in literally third grade. And that was your warning, right? That you can hurt people with your talent by telling the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'll be honest, I have a collection of memoirs that are humorous. David Sedaris was a big influence, and Augustine Burroughs and Bernard Cooper. And so they're humorous. And there's a lot of love in them, a lot. My aunt just found it. I just completely forgot about this one story, and she's completely cut me off now that she knows how I feel, and talk about the Italian passion that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, there you go. So where is the concern for hurting others, and is it more important to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly without concern? What's your take on that?
Well, I think that's of course much more specific to memoir, which is probably one of the reasons that I don't write memoir.
Well, I've learned my lesson. I took it off Amazon. Let's just say that.
But another. I mean, and I've seen the extraordinary work that people do with memoir, because part of it, I want to try to tell you two things that answer this. One is that, for instance, I've worked with many people who've come to me and said, well, I have 3 books, I have three memoirs or 4 or 5. And there are different times in their lives, and there are kind of different aspects of them and all of this. And I came to realize, and working with people, it was extraordinary to see them come to it, that part of the work of memoir may concern the building of a narrator, of a voice from within oneself that can hold the whole story. Doesn't mean people don't need to, maybe they write more than one memoir, but very often I've seen people compartmentalize, and it is because they haven't yet developed the narrator from themselves that can hold all these pieces. And when they do, it's extraordinary, because they are then able to stop and look and see all of these pieces and integrate them into themselves. And I know there's various kinds, like I am not a therapist. I never was, I never will be, but I have seen the power of that, because when people find a narrator that can hold all of these pieces of their story,
Does that
And
mean
there,
like I mean in reference to hurting others, is that like owning all the perspectives and worldviews expressed in that memoir, like owning it rather than maybe villainizing somebody or
well,
blaming?
the villainizing and blaming doesn't make for good memoir, period.
I agree. I
But
agree.
but
Well,
my
that's what I was
but
hinting at. I
yeah,
seriously look back at that story that deeply offended somebody, and I thought, well, with a little sense of humor about yourself, number one, everybody else finds it funny, right?
yeah,
So a little
yeah,
perspective, and it wasn't even that aunt; it was
right,
that whole side
right,
of the family.
yes,
And let's just say it was like a mafioso kind of thing, and it's
yeah,
funny. It's very funny, but there, it's like if you can't see the love in it and have a sense of humor about yourself,
yeah.
it's more about you at that point.
Yeah. But the whole, I mean, I when I wrote poetry, I wrote a lot of I poetry, and part of what brought me back to fiction was that I felt done in a sense, and
Mm,
and other voices were kind of inhabiting me,
mm,
possessing me,
mm,
and I moved back to story, which I had written some
mm.
before, but I remember my very first little baby juvenilia book of poetry. Bless you, Mom. But there was one, and I grew up in actually a very difficult, extremely difficult family. But it wasn't that all of it was about that. But there's one thing that there was a poem where there's my mother standing in her underwear washing the dishes, and I was it was there. And so I was terrified that she would go, oh my God, she would flip out completely. And we had very difficult relationship. And when she read it, and I was visiting her, and she said, I read your book. And I'm like, oh, shit. And she said, and I know that, you're a writer. And so writers, they make their stories the way that they want to make their stories. So I'm fine. And I was
Oh,
like, I was celebrating that.
oh.
But I moved to fiction, not because I was afraid of hurting anyone or bored with my life, but because I had something else to do. And
Mm,
the fullest expression of my being is had to do with placing, how can I say, being in the midst of the world, because I was, and being in the midst of so many kinds of people because I was,
mm,
and being intimately, deeply connected as family, as partner in so many ways to different kinds of people in the political sense, in struggle, in the aesthetic sense.
mm,
I understood, and then part of why I feel I've been a little bit, even though I've had to fight through it, but immune to what I was told I had to do to be an American, quote, American
mm.
writer, it was because I understood America as indigenous peoples, as African diaspora people, as and on and on and on, and not in a way that was just political, but in a way that this was my world, this was my community, this was my music, the sort of mix of the world, because I am a person of the mix, and I don't know how else to say it.
Yes. Well, you wrote
Um,
again in the document that I'm looking at it. You wrote a little bit about how your history sits in you, right?
mm,
But
mm.
it's almost reciprocal too. What is my place in the world or in the United States,
Yeah,
right? Or in this tribe?
yeah,
It's
yeah. That's right. That's right.
really
And
beautiful. I want to ask you, back
uh-huh.
to voice. You have a beautiful speaking voice. Do you hear that a lot?
you know, I do, and I
It's
don't. I don't hear it.
oh well, just own it, because
Okay.
they say, uh, I forget. I know why the caged bird sings. What the hell is her name?
Yeah, Maya
Oh yeah,
Angelou.
like I mean, it
Yeah.
takes on such resonance when you hear her speaking her own
Oh,
voice.
whoa.
So this
Yeah,
is obviously a
that's a
transition.
that's a
Also, on a time level, we probably have to wrap it up. But I
uh,
would love to because we've spoken so much about your your next work, are you inspired to share an excerpt, or should that we do a whole nother episode and devote it?
Oh, I mean, you know how writers get, they go, and then I wrote, and then I wrote. But I would love to read something.
Please.
And what's so strange is, of course, that because this is an ensemble, sort of, it centers in this young woman, but it is kind of an ensemble. So parts of it are different, very different, because they're different voices. But I'm gonna read a part that, let's see.
This is from the history artist, correct?
Yeah, history artist, and I have to just let me think of.
While you're looking, this is the one about the Cambodian woman born during the U.S. invasion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, and she is. Yep, there it is. Okay, so she is. She is in Boston, with a man that she lived with, and yeah, and he okay, because this speaks directly, I think, to, okay, so it's a long story. That's why it's a novel. Okay.
Right. Well, but is there setup? I feel like we're on a talk show. Do you want to set up this clip?
Oh, not so much. But no, they're in Boston. They met. She was younger. He did relief work in Cambodia, in part because like 10 years before or something, his brother was an activist and committed suicide after the U.S. ground invasion of Cambodia. And so years later, he goes to Cambodia. He does work with a church to feed people, to do various things, and meets this young woman who he is completely respectful of, etc. But and she has been someone who was in the killing fields, and then came back, and was basically still a child, pushed into prostitution because her mother was ill. She had a younger sister. She was it in terms of earning money, as often happens. So she has all of that, but and it's important. But so it's she and this sort of son of Boston Brahmins, Edward, who spent all this time in Cambodia. Her name is Devi Mao, and here it is. Okay, and was a word she liked. She chanted it in her head that day in Boston near the Commons as she looked at dress after dress, this one and that one and this one and that one. She made a song of what she could have. And was a word that connected things, even if they seemed far away, even if they seemed to have nothing to do with each other. So when she started a sentence with "and," though her teacher told her not to, and sometimes Edward made one of his faces, she refused to listen and started one sentence after another with "and. And I am still a girl," she told Edward. He yes-deared her, but she couldn't care less. And she felt like a girl, still, alone in this Boston house. Devi was frightened. This was funny to her. "I am the queen of alone," she announced to Edward as he was packing to go on yet another trip, this time to see his mother. "You can come with me. Why don't you?" Edward said. "It would not please your mother to see me again." "What's that supposed to mean? She was perfectly nice to you when she was here." "Yes, perfectly, like a zero. Sometimes you were really crazy enough to keep away from the crocodile. I'm asking you once more, and then I'm going to finish packing. Come with me, please come with me. You can do anything you want to when we get there. You don't have to sit and talk with her all day. I have business to discuss with her anyway." "Yes, business. Not for me to understand. But when you met me, I did business." Taking money for sewing is not doing business. It's just a job, what every working person does. You don't understand, or you won't say, "I did business." Enough now. I was business. Business was here in me. Look, I have to get going. Don't you want to see my business? Don't you want to check my business, see how I do it? See if I know enough about it to sit with you and your mother like a person and discuss this business. He headed for the bedroom. He was trying not to yell at her. He hated when she brought it all up after these years of his saying nothing. He could see her, that girl she was, that little girl in Phnom Penh, and what he knew could kill him. He felt blind. Rage, or the wash of the years, the forgetting, covered him. He was tired for all he had to do to love her, not the beaten child within her, but to get to the woman, lovely, desiring, grown. He zipped up his suitcase, half-packed. He would buy whatever else he needed. There's money in the usual place, in the drawer, he pointed. She was standing in the doorway. Oh, so we can do business. Stop it. Don't be an idiot. For some groceries and to buy new sneakers. She lay on the bed and looked over at him. I know everything any person could know about business. Business is in me. Here it is. And what she did then was horrible to him, but he knew it was true. And you can put yourself right here in my business. I give you for free. Big sale today. Free sale. But next time you pay double. Stop it now. Now that's business. I have to go. Oh, but this is American business. You can tell your mother I am a businesswoman and a friend to the Americans, a patriot in my business. He was frightened. He knelt by the bed and lifted her hand from between her legs, kissed it gently. She was small today. Her whole body curled into itself, fit into his arms. He lay down with her and wept behind her. She was silent. She felt blind. There was a crack in the ceiling, a whisper of rain. She went there, and all the words were gone. She was a child in the rain, and Edward, he was not even there. I'll stay home, he said, many minutes later. Good, she said, without thinking, and began to unroll her body against his in the moonlight. No more business.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's
That's no wonder, God. No wonder that girl had that one word review. Intense. I mean, I'm sure you get that reaction a lot. Wow.
Yeah.
Powerful, powerful.
Thank
so
you.
beautiful.
Thank you. And
I
it's
love
not
that.
all, I found there's all kinds of scenes in there. Some of them are beautiful and happy and but that's
I love the one line, the one sentence, she was small today. I don't know why that really struck me.
Yeah.
But I also, it kind of tied everything together too, because the and like this whole idea of structure has come up a lot today, right? Like, not just you rebelling against structure, but the kind of non-linear intuitive space that it can transport you to, right? When you break the rules.
Yeah.
You took it. I know nothing about you tried to set it up a little bit, but with very little context, you brought us there. It was really touching.
Oh, good.
And profound.
Thank you.
And I just this is a weird side note, but talk about synchronicity. I don't know. This is going to cheapen it. I shouldn't say it. But just last night, I saw that scene from Full Metal Jacket. Do you remember that?
Oh, it's been a while. Yeah.
Well, a friend of mine used in the 90s would say, "Me so horny, me love you long time." Like she made it a catchphrase. But that scene, it was had extra resonance for me because I just watched that and it was really hard to watch, to be honest.
Yeah.
Anyway, wow, I will definitely be picking that up. When is it out?
Good. Well, I have about probably 3 months more. It's taken me really long because I have I haven't had good circumstances, let's say, for doing it, but it's almost finished. It's I have just less than writing. I probably have a few more scenes to write, but it's more. I have some organizing in part because it is a book that has a number. It has sort of, I think, 6 probably. Devi and Edward, Franny and her mother Charlotte. Simile, and then there's someone who's passed, who's a very prominent figure, who's a playwright, and we have bits and pieces of his notes and recordings, the last part of the ensemble is an African gray parrot who is very
Really?
vocal.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's awesome.
Yes, and was perhaps in Pol Pot's room and got brought to the United States in one of those Air America airplanes.
Amazing.
So he's seen a lot, but perhaps he just was from the Bronx, where he was found by the playwright, and so yeah. So it's
no pressure from me, but I feel very honored that you shared it with us, considering it's not out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But
and
yeah, no pressure from me, but please, I'd like to pick it up. So.
Well, send me good completing energy, because I'm also finishing a book of poetry that Land in Water, Rise in Flame, and that's very close, and I'm going to get some response to it.
So you're back to poetry.
Well, I didn't mean to be, but it sounds so strange and it sounds so privileged, but it wasn't that. I got stuck in Europe with COVID. I didn't have it, but because I was asked to come for 3 months to work with a long-term client in Europe, and I went, and 5 weeks later I was in Athens. It was serious lockdown.
Wow.
And I couldn't get flights, and then I kept sort of going from country to country, and I couldn't everything in here was in the storage room. And nothing worked out. I couldn't get a place. So I went from let's see, basically from Greece. I lived in Ireland for 11 months after 6 months.
So you could fly from Greece to Ireland, but you couldn't fly into the United States?
Well, there
was a travel ban, right? In the United States.
Yeah. And also I kept trying, I'd get a ticket, and then I'd see the news that 500 of this airline's employees had COVID.
Right.
So it was also terrifying. If you remember back there, the idea of flying long distance was.
My sister
terrifying.
Was flying to Argentina. Her first grandkid was born in Argentina, and she flew there. They waited till they landed on the tarmac and turned the plane around and sent everybody home.
Oh my God.
They couldn't get out.
Yeah. So, and then not having, I didn't have a place to go. I had no place to go. So, and it wasn't the time to, but and then after Ireland, I spent 2 years in Berlin, on an artist, writer's visa called a Freiberufler. Ooh, I love that word.
Right.
And then I was in France. I was in the South mostly, for a few months, and then I came here.
Lucky you. I'm taking a mental vacation in the south of France.
Well, it was all, that was okay. But it was very tough.
I'm sure, yeah.
Visa applications, it was moving constantly. It was not being able to find places to live. It was not having things that I needed. It was, it was, what the heck is this language?
I wonder if that informs the work. Do you feel like there's,
and that pushed out, that's why I brought it up, because a lot of poems happen. And of course I was living in Minneapolis before I left. And so just some months later was the murder of George Floyd, which globally, was, I mean, I would drive.
How was it witnessing that from abroad? I remember the first time I went to Europe, it was during the OJ trial. And I actually remember thinking, thank God I can escape, the madness. And it was on every TV. Not that I see many TVs when I'm traveling, but I remember it was inescapable. I mean,
well, this was very personal, because I know this place. I've lived in this place on and off, altogether for about 13 years. I'm back there. I'm back here now in Minneapolis. I'm about 12 blocks from where he was murdered. So, but that, and then I sat with dear friends, 3 generations of them, in Galway, in the west of Ireland, and watched January 6th. And luckily these friends are super beautiful, conscious, serious people. And so we watched this, January 6th, that's all we have. So it was brilliantly fascinating to see people respond, to see how people took up the name George Floyd, and there were murals everywhere, and there, because people, of course, in other countries have had connected kinds of experiences and all of that. But one of the things I just really want to say is that being in Berlin was in ways very difficult. I've got a little history with folks, but it was also the whole question of place. There's a part of Berlin that there's a big exhibition hall. Outside of it is a permanent exhibition, like it's right near Die Mauer, it's right near the wall, and it's 1933 to 1945, documenting that on this sort of panel after panel outside, right? And then there's this big exhibition hall, which is called, and the whole area basically is the topography of terror.
Oh,
and so there was the SS office here, and all of the Einsatzgruppen, and I don't even know what all of because they were seriously organized, and the Stasi office here, and so this part of Berlin. I mean, Berlin is so rich in history from beyond that, not just that, right? But this whole idea of the topography of terror, which I grew up with, this constant free-floating sense of terror for a lot of reasons, and some individual, some larger, right? So standing on a place that was recognized, that was called the topography of terror, was horrible, but it was almost a liberation, because it shifted, it made concrete and specific for at least a while, that,
you can't write that shit.
Yeah. So
life provides those opportunities. That's amazing.
So, and now I'm back, and I don't know what shall become of me. So when this book comes out, please tell all your friends, because and let's change my life with artistic success. How about
absolutely? Well, good vibes, and I will be the first to pick it up, or send us a PDF maybe before it.
Okay.
Well, we'd love to have you back on.
I'd love
if
to
you don't skip town and leave the continent.
We are connected, right? Even if I do,
right.
I
modern
stay
technology.
Right, I stay up very late because I know that I'm used to wanting to be in an event that would take place at 3 a.m. and you're
right. Well, we'll try not to do that to you.
Okay, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. It's so lovely to talk with you both, and I'm
likewise
really grateful. I'm really grateful.
Thank you.
I love to talk.
It's obviously it's mutual. We've gone over, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. So you'll let me know. We don't have to record that, but you'll let me know, like, where it is, how people link to it, and all of that kind of stuff, right? And I will, because I have lots of people who are like, I want to hear it.
I thought Virginia would jump in as producer, but yeah, we'll follow up with the link to the episode. Please do share it, because we're in infancy, as you know. We want to, we're doing it as a labor of love, and we want to reach as many people as possible. So we're counting on you. We want to ride your coattails and your platform, and we'll send the link. We'll probably send the link within a week for sure.
That's great. No rush, and I'll let people know, and that's a service to me, because
well, it's cross-pollination. Everybody benefits.
I like that.
All right.
Please have a wonderful, Sunday.
Before you go, Anya, we actually have a ritual that we do. So do you want to explain it, Dominic?
Oh my God, really? Okay. I've got well, I was gonna drop it this week, but all right. Quickly pick it seems so silly now because we just heard your beautiful poetic prose. But so this is a book. It's my only nonfiction book. It's the one the podcast is based off of. But it talk about linear. I mean, it's a nonfiction book. So everybody take a snooze while we do this. I mean, really, it seems silly at this point because your work was so powerful, but pick a number, Anya, if you would, from 1 to 353.
Oh, wow. Okay. I got it. Should I tell you what it is?
Oh, no, you should tell us. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, it's
The
actually,
suspense was killing me.
I'm sure it's actually 99, which seems trite, but I like this number.
So what we do while I'm flipping to that page, just for fun, I flip to the page that the guest mentions. I read from the top, and it's strangely, synchronicity wise, always so far has keyed in to what we've spoken about. But it's just a way of sharing a little bit of the book each week, if that makes sense.
Yes.
All right. So fingers crossed. Here's what we've got. The writing of the climactic scene. Okay, it's going to require context. So I guess I'm going on about the writing of the seeker. That's my latest mythic fiction novel. So I guess I was talking about the writing process. And at the top of page 99, it just says the writing of the climactic scene and my spontaneous coffee run took place mid-pandemic. I was sipping my coffee on the Starbucks patio when my neighbor sat down at my table. Like many, he was discouraged by the months and months of lockdown. This is already related, right? Because that feeling of mid-pandemic lockdown.
Yeah.
By months and months of lockdown, the restrictions, the surreal tone of life. I hadn't batted an eye when COVID came along, as I'd had my proverbial brush with death a year earlier, and the world had long since become unrecognizable. In fact, my close call is what had lit the fire to connect my craft with true purpose. The seeker was the product of that fire that could not have been more inspired, motivated, or on fire creatively. When my neighbor sat down, my mind had been mulling over the half-finished scene. In it, Zeus literally sticks his head between the clouds and appears to Amadeus, the demigod protagonist, in his darkest moment, the dark night of the soul. Amadeus, an aspect of me, of course, finally confronts him about why the gods would have it in for him. I didn't share any of this with my neighbor. To say he was in a pissy mood would be an understatement. His usual bitterness, pessimism, and cynicism was jacked up by COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, incidents of police brutality, and the political divisiveness dominating the news. Wow, we talked about that too.
Yeah.
I made some off-the-cuff comment that I wasn't quote-unquote playing code for the fact I had bigger fish to fry, and I didn't engage in the divisiveness that appeared petty to me in my state of broadened perspective. A brush with death will make almost anything trivial by comparison. I'm going to cut this short, but the scene, it's basically about when you're engaged in the creative process and it's organic, right? And you're evolving through the creative process. Art reflects life. And so in my experience, the universe just provides what's needed. And things literally appeared in my path on an as-needed basis because it takes a while to write a novel, right? Every day it was informed by these gifts from the universe. So this one is worth, I'll tell you the end of that story. So my neighbor sat down and I had been kind of avoiding writing this scene, actually, but I did at some point go, well, talk about formula. I thought, well, the protagonist never really does go head to head with the antagonistic force, which it's all symbolism, but it turned out to be Zeus himself. So I was just going to write the scene where actually they go head to head and he shakes his fist at God and says, why do you have it in for me? But I hadn't written the scene yet. When my neighbor sat down, and he's African-American, and, we're in the middle of the Black Lives Movement, and he was not in a good mood. So he sat down, and I made the mistake of saying, and now I'm just telling it, it was too long to read. But somewhere in there, I said, I'm not engaging in the divisiveness because I'm just trying to stay alive. And that was the truth. I was fighting for my life. Because we were right, the healthcare system was already broken. I had to fight for every bit of care, including physical therapy, to remain on the planet. I had to fight for it. So anyway, he heard me say, and he didn't know the details of my medical emergency or any of that. But I said, yeah, I'm just trying to stay alive, to be honest. And he goes, I've heard that. People all over saying they're trying to stay alive. But what for? What the fuck are their lives worth? He literally said, what the hell? What kind of life is it? Something like that. And I thought, you never know from the outside. You can't assess other people's value to the planet from the outside. But I also walked away and thought, okay, I've got my scene. Because the very scene is we've chewed you up and spit you out, right? The gods had chewed Amadeus up and spit him out and they were done with him. And he was digging in his heels and saying, no, I want to co-create with the universe. I've got more to do here. So that was the exact conversation. The thing is, his name is Zeus. My neighbor's name is Zeus.
No me digas. Oh my God. It's like,
But that happened every day in the writing process, though. Like I was making up myths on an as needed basis. Some of it was Minoan religion and I honored it, but then I would make up little myths. And one of them just came out of the mouth of a patron at Starbucks. It was amazing. Anyway, did you follow that at all? Like, you were telling me my life had no value. And his name was Zeus.
His name was Zeus. Oh my God. I only met one person named Zeus in my life in San Diego.
It's a great name, isn't it? It's so powerful.
He was Cambodian. So I don't know if it, where his name came to be Zeus, but
I think I've met dogs named Zeus, but never a human until my neighbor. Anyway, thanks for indulging that.
Absolutely. Do you know someone named Peter Fay by any chance?
Peter?
Nope,
Fay.
I don't.
Because he has I spoke to him a long time ago. I haven't spoken to him for a very long time, but I think he has his work, his project, I think his site is called Into the Mythica, and it has to do with story and this level, this sort of mythical level.
What's the last name? F-A?
F-A-E, I think is what he goes by. And it's but the site I think is called Into the Mythica. I'll find it and send you that.
Thank you. I would love that.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on, Anya.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that it, we work so hard and so much of it in an isolated way that to be able to have this kind of talk and bringing forward, ideas and exchanging them and being heard as a writer and a teacher is a real gift.
Thank you for saying that. That's truly the spirit, is just, we may not have any answers, but having the conversations, especially because of the isolation of COVID, it's like, it's time to start, inspiring one another and talking about why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys.
Everyone stays well. Your loved ones are well, and I'll look forward to hearing without any pressure whenever you're ready, because I know how these things go. So but I'll get it around. Believe me.
Thank you so much.
And look into your other podcasts too.
Yeah, please do. Poke around on that. Okay.
I will. Thank you.
Have a great day. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up by saying, please join us for future episodes, if for no other reason than a little inspiration. Remember, life is story. And to mix metaphors, we can get our hands in the clay. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. See you next time.